m'appelle Idan. Bonjour class. Hi. My name's Idan. I'm going to be talking about typography. How's everyone doing? Everyone awake? Yes. Kind of. I know it's tough, like afternoons. So if you have like caffeine or amphetamines, Sharon, just Karen. Right. So I'm Idan. Sit back, relax, enjoy yourself. All the slides will be online, and all the URL, like anything that has like a reference to something, the URL is on the slide. You can check it out later. Not like you can check it out now if you wanted to, because internet over carrier pigeon or something. And who am I? I'm the core designer, the benevolent designer, or whatever. I'm the core designer for the Django web framework, and my day job is visualizing data at Heroku, who, as Jacob pointed out, is hiring. So if you're interested, talk to us. So I said that you're going to hear about typography, but let's talk a little bit about psychology first. So there's this great book called Thinking Fast and Slow by DjangoCon. He's an economist, and he explored sort of what makes us think that something is true, right? His research showed that a large part of that decision has to do with the cognitive strain that we experience when we're exposed to something. And he specifically addresses good typography in one of his experiments as a means to lower cognitive strain, to make it easier for people to understand, and to make your product, whatever your product is, more persuasive. Okay? And when I say typography, right, most people say you're talking about fonts, right? And fonts are important, typefaces specifically, but they're a subset. They're an important subset, but they're still just a subset. Typography is something much larger. It's the art and science of presenting textual information, and we have a lot of experience with this. From the dawn of when we invented writing systems and started, committing words to clay tablets, and when we finally figured out how to make paper and put ink on it, and later we invented the printing press. Even the printing press is like 600 years old. It was like 1500 that Gutenberg invented the printing press. So we have a lot of history and a lot of experience and a lot of convention and tradition around how we arrange letters on a page to make it easy for somebody else to get an idea into their brain. So yeah, normally you can think about type on two levels, sort of the micro and the macro. The micro level has to do with properties of a given typeface or font, right? How the letters look, what shapes they have, how those shapes work together, how you can manipulate how compressed or expanded that text is, like how much you're putting the letters together, pushing them apart. But on the macro level, it has more to do with sort of the architecture of type on the page. What's the width of the column of your main body text, and how much space you have between lines, sort of these larger relationships. If you think about type or text like a fabric, something that you're weaving, then the micro is the threads, and the macro is like the garment. And yeah, even before the advent of movable type, even before we had printing presses, scribes gave a lot of thought to the user experience of books and how they laid out text, right, on the page. They used what they knew about proportions to make layouts that looked beautiful and were usable. And you have to remember that when books, first became a thing, even before the printing press, they were fantastically expensive. They were really expensive. A book cost like a car. You had to employ like a team of people who were the equivalent of like today's PhDs to write your book, okay? And you weren't gonna write another one. You had just the one, just the one book. You had to have a layout where fingers wouldn't cover the written parts, because fingers smudge ink over time, and books cost so much, you're not going to print them again, you need them to last a while, okay? And even simple things that we take for granted with the ability to cheaply disseminate information today, what if you had like errata, some kind of new information that you had to tell people about? You needed room in the margins to write like those updates, those corrections to your text. Like actually, it turns out that God didn't kill that guy at that time, and it was something, I don't know, whatever. Whatever it is that they wanted to write, update. But they had one thing, one thing that people working in print have had since forever, which is control. Okay? And unfortunately for us, in our medium of the web or anything electronic, the one thing we don't really have is control. We have no control at all. We work in these terrible, terrible environments. It's very hostile. You can't make any assumptions. Like, you can't assume the size of people's screens, right? Or even what orientation they are, or what kind of lighting they have around them. Like, are they indoors, are they outdoors? And now we have it even worse, because people are taking computers with them everywhere they go. And they're reading information on these little computers that fit into their pockets. So it's an even more hostile environment. So there's literally no control that we have. And yet, it's still incumbent on us as creators of content, as deliverers of content, to find the best way we can to take that textual content and make it accessible to whoever is using it. And ignoring these hundreds of years of convention and history is stupid. It's bad. We should be building on that to the extent that we can. So if you're writing content for the web, it behooves you to learn a little bit about this. And I have some good news to relate today. Sort of giving a deep dive on what you can do, sort of like the most advanced kinds of typographical controls you can apply when you're building for the web today. So if you don't do front end, hopefully it's still accessible enough, and if not, I'm sorry. Okay, so right, the web is still kind of behind print in a lot of things, and it's catching up. There are some things that are specific and native to the web. Like, once upon a time, you couldn't write a book that would change typefaces on demand because somebody has bad eyesight and they need something bigger. Okay, you couldn't do that. Now we can do that on the web. Sometimes these things are hard to use, but they pay a lot of dividends. So I encourage you to check these things out. They're all totally useful. Okay, type size, like the size of your type, how big it is one of the three primary levers you have on the legibility of your text. Who knows what the default size of text in browsers is? Shout it out. 16 goes to the man over there somewhere. Right, 16. Normally, most crowds that I ask this question, they're like 12 or 10 or something like that. No, it's 16. It's 16 for a reason. So the classic sort of standard in books for a long, long time is 11 or 12 points. If you're setting type in a magazine or newsprint or things like that. Initially, when people did stuff for the web, they'd say, oh, I don't know why it's 16. I'm going to make the type a little bit smaller. I'm going to make it 12 pixels so it works exactly the way that I'm used to. But there's a problem. There's a reason why type was set by default at 16 pixels on the web. It's because, physics, things that are further away appear smaller to the eye. There's no getting around that. And we read text on a screen at a different distance than we read text on a book. We tend to hold books and newspapers closer to our faces. So what you're looking at here is 16-pixel typeset on the web and 12-point typeset in print, held at sort of their nominal reading distances. And they perceptibly appear the same. There's a reason why you want larger type on the web. Because people view it from slightly further away. So, okay, great, so you want to use 16. But it's better to actually think proportionally. You don't want to actually use pixels. You want to use these proportional measures, ems or percents. Why? Well, proportions are great for a lot of reasons, but mostly because when you think in proportions, you're taking advantage of a lot of things about our brains that love proportion, that find beauty in proportion. Architects have known about this for centuries. Designers have known about this for centuries. So proportions are great. You should use proportional controls when you're sizing your type. But, so what's these proportional controls, right? Who here knows what ems are? Okay, more people than I expected. Awesome. So for anyone else who doesn't know what an em is, an em, like an EM, an em is a proportional unit of type. When you design type, you work inside a box, right? And you draw every one of the letters that you're going to have, every one of the glyphs in your typeface, inside that box. So the largest glyph, the largest letter that you can going to draw has to fit inside that box, and generally it's a capital M in Latin or Roman bases. And you can see that for different typefaces set at the same size, here we're looking at times in Georgia at two different sizes, sorry, the same size. But you can see how they appear to be very different in size. It's because when they designed these pieces, they used a different amount of that box. But I can talk about them in terms of M's. I can say this is 1M and this is 1M, and if later I decide to say, redesign my thing, I don't want to use times, I want to use Georgia. If I use pixels to size my type, now my proportions are all out of whack because pixels are fixed. But if I use M's to size my type, then everything expands or contracts according to the metrics of that font. So you want to use proportional measures because it sort of safeguards you against any kind of changes, like if you want to use a different typeface. Right. So how do you use M's on the web? Well, they multiply. So if you have this sort of structure of elements in your document, you apply these values in your style, then you just go down the column, you multiply them, and you end up with 5.4 M's. And great, that's fantastic. It's not that hard. Right? Not that hard? Everyone knows about this? Okay, pop quiz. Okay, what size will the H1s be? Okay, let's start with a simple question. Will they be the same? Who thinks they will be the same? Who thinks they won't be the same? Everyone else? Okay, awesome. So, what's the first one going to be? Shout it out. 3, yes, correct. And what's the second one going to be? That's right. And so, this is something that's sort of contrived and simple, right? The structure, and even when I add color coding, it kind of makes it easier to track. But when you think about real documents that you're building for real projects, they never look this simple. You have to keep all of this state in your head of like, I'm inside this, which is inside that, which is inside this other thing, and these are the styles that apply to this, but only if they have that class, and that's a mess. It's really hard to keep track of. And sometimes this is useful. Sometimes you really want to create a style that will adapt to whatever it's inside. But more often than not, you really like to just sort of have one baseline thing, like we have the meter. What is a meter? A meter is actually a piece of titanium that's sitting in a lab in France somewhere, right? That's a meter. Now there's attempts to redefine it as the distance traveled by an electron in X amount of time, something like that. But a meter is actually just a thing. It's a piece of metal. It's this long, and everything else is calibrated to the meter. Here, you can do the same thing with root M's. Root M's are a new unit instead of regular M's. Okay? And basically what they do is they ignore everything except for the one at the root, like your meter. Okay? So where regular M's multiply as you go, HTML body, header, H1, you just multiply across. Rems skip everything except the root. So whatever you set your size on the HTML to be, rems will be relative to that, which means that you can use them all over the place and maintain a sense of proportion everywhere. So yeah, they're kind of awesome, and they work in all of the browsers that you really care about. They're safe to use, and there's polyfills for older browsers, so should you use them? Definitely. They're fantastic. And like I said, sometimes you want the cascade, but sometimes you don't, and more often you don't, so use rems. It makes it easier to set up a system of dimensions, where multiplying is just multiple of some basic value. So it's easier, it's better, you should use it. It works great on mobile, it works great on desktop. So I know I said that typefaces are sort of the subset of typography, but they're actually a pretty important subset of typography, so let's talk a little bit about typefaces. Sometimes you want to apply just, type selectively to, little bits of text. Say you want to make your ampersands pretty. Then great, you wrap it in a span and give that span a class, and then, give that class a font family, and bam, you have nicer ampersands. This is pretty easy. But the real magic of font family is that it's applied character by character. It's not like the browser takes a chunk of text and says, okay, what are the, what scripts are being used, what glyphs are in this thing, which of the fonts in the stack has most of them. I'm going to pick one winner and apply it to the whole thing. saying no. It actually goes character by character, and at any given character, it's going to apply the stack. So, it starts out with Helvetica, and Helvetica is great, la la la, and the A, and then all of a sudden it runs into the umbrella character. And so, the font database is like, so Helvetica, you got an umbrella for me? And Helvetica's like, nope. And then it's like, yo, Ariel, like, hook me up. You got an umbrella? And Ariel's like, sorry, bro. And then it falls back on sans serif, and sans serif is sort of the catch-all. It'll look for like that glyph in every one of the sans serif fonts on your system, and one of them, comes up successful with this umbrella. And as you can see, you can have a mix of scripts, of character types, as much as you want. Just put together a font stack, and it'll use the first one it can. So really, what you can think of is that the browser with FontFace, you're basically specifying like a database of fonts, right? How do you control that database that it has access to? Well, there's the FontFace tag, which lets you basically add new typefaces to the database of fonts that the browser recognizes. So it's pretty simple. It's got a family name where you say this is what the font is called, a source, which looks just like loading anything else, like a resource inside your CSS. So you can say it's a local font with a little local font name, or you can say here's a URI, and this is where that font file is located, something .wav or .ttf or whatever. You can also specify Unicode ranges, and we'll talk about those in a second. Those are actually kind of awesome. It lets you say, I only want you to use this font face for characters in this set of Unicode ranges. And it's not just one range. You can have like individual characters with commas or ranges separated by hyphens. And the rest of them are exactly like they look like in the font rules. So font variant, italic or not, whatever, stretch, weight, is it bold, is it not, font style. Right. Let's look a little bit about Unicode range hacks. So one of the things you can do is, force typefaces for specific scripts. So I'm from Israel, so I run into this a lot of times. I want to use a specific typeface for Hebrew and only Hebrew. So I have a whole website that's got mixed content. And I want to use a specific typeface for Hebrew. Great, I can say, here's a font, a Hebrew font, and it has English characters, but I just don't like them very much. I'd really prefer to use something else. So I can actually say, here's a font, please only use it for like this range of Unicode characters. And then I can put that font first in the stack, and it'll only get used for Hebrew and nothing else. So this is a cool trick. You can also use this for defensive styling. So, for example, say you have something like with math. Okay, this is kind of a good example. I did this once, where you have one of the regular fonts in your stack has some of the math characters that you want, some of the little Greek letters, but not all of them. And you'd prefer that the math at least look consistent. You don't want a mix of like some of the Greek characters from this font and some of them from this font. You can actually say, like, please use only this range from this math font and put the math font first. And then you will guarantee that all the math characters, all the little Greek letters, come out using this font that you specify. So awesome things you can do with Unicode ranges. There's a lot of like room for abusing this to do all sorts of other stuff, like slimming down your fonts by like taking out chunks. You can use tools to get rid of a lot of the letters in the font to make that font file smaller. And then say, like, please only use it for these ranges, the ones that I actually liked in the font. So there's a lot of cool things you can do with this. Right? It's cool. But be careful. There's still lots of ways that you can screw yourself with FontFace. One of them is faux bold and faux italic. Okay? This is one of the scourges of the web, and I don't know why this persists as like a legit thing that browsers do. So let's say you define some font face, and you say this is a font, it's called faux, and it's got a font weight of normal. Okay? I only have this in regular weight. And now, at some point in your document, you ask it for the bold version of faux. It looks around in the font database and finds out it doesn't have the bold version of faux. And what does the browser do then? It fakes it. It fakes it by just making the font fatter, like algorithmically. And let me tell you, this is bad. It's very, very bad. And it's even worse for italics. For italics, it literally takes the text and like skews it, like stretches it sideways. It looks awful, and you never ever want this to happen. So if you're going to be defining fonts with font face, make sure that you never ever use them like inappropriately like this, because it will look like crap and undo all of the awesome work you did to have great typing. That's not the only thing that can make your life unhappy. Custom fonts need to be downloaded like any other resource, right? You say I've got a typeface, it exists in this file, the browser runs across it just like it runs across images or whatever scripts, and it fires off another thread to fetch that font. But what happens in the meantime? Okay? What happens in the meantime is the flash of unstyled text, and it looks kind of like this. It starts with like one of the installed system fonts, and then up after a second or two, or however long it takes to download the file, it just cuts over to the real thing. This is kind of annoying. It's not the end of the world, but it isn't even really that simple. There's actually two problems. We have two behaviors. We have the flash of unstyled text and the flash of no text. And it isn't really clear which one is better. The flash of no text is that some browsers, in the absence of them not having the font that you've told them to download yet, won't show fallbacks from your font stack. They'll show nothing. Okay? And the problem with this is that it looks like you just have a slow website. Even if everything else loaded fine, the content is all there, the browser's just not rendering it yet. And lots of studies show that speed is a major component of user experience. So yeah. So how does this look like? In browsers that have the flash of no text, which is most of the modern browsers, they show nothing until they show the real thing. IE, and specifically old IE, shows this sort of flash of unstyled text. These are insane. Which one's less bad? I don't know. Apparently all the browser vendors that we have standardized on the flash of no text. But it's not just the fonts that are different. It's also the metrics, right? How am I going to lay out this page? How much room am I going to leave for this bit of text? That's defined by the size of the type. And the browser doesn't know the size of the type until it has the font. And unlike images, where you can say ahead of time, listen, there's going to be an image here, and it's going to be 400 pixels by 300 pixels, so just leave that space blank, but you can lay everything else out around it. That works great for images, but you can't do that for type unless you actually have the font. When you look at this again, you can see that while the type isn't there, what it's actually doing is it's using the metrics of the fallback font. And as soon as the real font shows up, it actually triggers a reflow. And you can see this little black stripe of content that's below the fold actually pop out as soon as the real font loads. So beware of the fact that you're going to see a reflow. This is bad both for performance, and it can confuse users because all of a sudden things jumped around on the page. It's not just that the type changed, it's that where the type is changed. So that's bad. And all of this is further complicated by bad performance. Say you're on an island at a conference, and you have bad connectivity, and you're unable to, get the font face in a long time, where long has been defined as 3 seconds by the browser vendors. What happens then? Well, it depends. It depends on the browser you use, and it even depends on the version of the browser you use. But it seems, once again, that browsers are standardizing on something. And what happens is that these browsers will, after 3 seconds of not having the font, they'll give up, they'll throw their hands in the air, and they'll show the fallback font until the real one arrives. So even though nominally you're going to have the flash of no text, if it takes too long, eventually the browser will show the fallback font, and then show the real font when it finally shows up. So be aware of this behavior, because it can lead to a very poor user experience, particularly for mobile users where connectivity is flaky. So just be aware of how this is, and notice that Chrome is changing its behavior as of the version that's 1 or 2 versions out now, I think. I don't remember how far out it is. There are some tools you can use to sort of like bend this process to your will. One of them is Adobe Blank. Adobe Blank is a web font that claims to have every single glyph, all of them, but doesn't have any of them. It has blank squares for all of them. So if you want to force a flash of no text, and make sure that there is never a case where people see the fallback fonts before they see the real font, then you use Adobe Blank, and you put it right after your custom font. So when the custom font fails to load, or it's still loading, Adobe Blank will load much faster because it's a much smaller file, and it will ensure that you don't end up with the fallbacks. For IE9, you can turn the font data into like a base64 string and include it as a data URI. This will force a flash of no text as opposed to like a fallback. So this is a cool hack for IE9. And most importantly, because you haven't heard this enough already at this conference from Frank and Chris, cache everything aggressively, particularly fonts, because it makes such a difference to how people perceive your site. Don't make users download them more than once. Fonts change like never. Okay, cache them forever, as much as you can. And there's also some awesome stuff happening in the spec in the future. CSS3 font loading. It's like, you know, a JavaScript API that you can use to get events like, I'm starting to try to load this font. I failed to load this font, now I'm showing fallback text. I succeeded in loading this font, I'm about to show the real text. You know, would you like to do something about this? It's like these events that you can trap and do things about. So yeah, this is a work in progress. The tools are getting better, the workarounds are there, but it's still very much on you to make it work well. Right, so our journey to like better type on the web doesn't even end there. Type rendering, okay? How does type turn into pixels on your screen, right? Fonts, like what's actually in a font file is a bunch of curves, mathematical descriptions of like, this is how this letter looks, these are the curves, it's vector, and it can scale to any size. But when it comes time to actually draw text on the screen, there's some piece of software in your computer that takes these curves and scales them to the right size, and then decides which pixels to make black and which ones to leave white. Okay? And that piece of software is called a rasterizer, and there's no one best. This is as much an area of art as it is of science. And unfortunately, the situation here is kind of tricky when it comes to Windows particularly. So everyone knows about sort of the difference in font rendering between Windows and Mac, and even different versions of Windows. Everybody looks at, you know, type on Mac, and it's just like, oh, delicious, it's like dipped in chocolate. It's like a little bit fatter than all the other kinds of type. And I don't know how easy it is to see up here on the display. You can see it a little bit. The type on OS X appears to be a little fatter. On Windows, you have two different engines, and the GDI engine has two different modes. And which ones are triggered are actually kind of complicated. And you can see that there's slight differences. If not, like, look online later at like the PDF version of the slides, and you'll be able to see it a little bit more clearly. So which Windows one will get used? Well, it depends what kind of curves are in if it's a PostScript or a TrueType font outline. And this is the table that tells you which one will get used. If you don't like this, then get in line. It's terrible. Thankfully, though, like, you know, the top two rows of the table we can slowly care less and less about. Ideally, you want direct write. Direct write is the best. It actually is pretty good. It knows how to do type rendering very well, and it particularly knows how to do type rendering with deformation. Like if you want text on a path, that's not going to be like just straight text on a line. Or you want to do some kind of stretching or squashing of your text. If you try to do it with GDI, it's going to look very, very bad. But if you do it with direct write, it'll look pretty good. This is all on the browser vendors to implement. And as you can see, there are different places at different times. The moral of the story is that you must test your typefaces. Test them on all of the platforms you expect to use your content on. Otherwise, you will not know how your site looks like to the people, you know, viewing your site. Okay, that's a lot of doom and gloom. Let's talk about like awesome stuff that's coming, things that are great. There's a lot of things that non-web designers, like print designers, have taken for granted for forever. And we're finally starting to get access to them on the web. One of them is ligatures. Okay, what are ligatures? if you notice on the bottom, there's slight differences to the characters that happen for specific pairs. Some of them are really subtle. Like if you look at the sort of the first stem of the U that's underneath the T, it's just a little bit higher. It looks a little bit more natural. I mean, this is supposed to be emulating like a hand-drawn brushstroke. And if someone was really drawing this U underneath the T, maybe they'd start the U a little bit higher. And of course, things that are like, connecting, the U to the R or the E to the S, those are all ligatures. And basically what happens behind the scenes is that the person who makes the typeface, when they draw this typeface, they draw all of the letters individually. But then for any specific pairs of letters, they'll draw that pair again. And whenever the rasterizer runs across like, an ES, it will like choose the ES pair as opposed to the two individual glyphs. You can now do ligatures on the web for most of the browsers. There's also 4 kinds of numerals, right? Who here knows about numerals? 4 kinds of numerals. Great, it's not 0. It's working, my plan. They're kind of awesome, and this is like a super classic thing. You know how in clothes there's like a lot of things that you can do to like class up how you're dressed in some fashion, and people who know, like oh, the buttons should be like this or whatever, they know that that's like a sign of class. Okay, this is a sign of class. If you use this on the web, anyone who knows, they're like, oh, they really care. Okay, so use it. What are the 4 kinds of numerals? Well, there's old style versus lining numerals. Old style, for old style numerals, you have sort of something that looks like a mix of lower and uppercase for Roman letters. And if you have a mix of a lower and uppercase, like running body text, you want to be using old style figures. On the other hand, for headlines or for things that are standalone, like displays of numbers, like if I was now styling Kibana or something else that was showing like a lot of data. If I'm going to be showing like big numbers or numbers that are standing alone, I don't want them to look like the 1956 on the top. I don't want the old style. I want lining numerals. And there's also proportional versus tabular, right? Proportional works great in body text. That's how you want it. But what if you're building a table and you need things to line up so people have an easy time summing them? Well, great. Here you go. You can use proportional and tabular. And you do this through this fantastic CSS feature called font feature settings. And unfortunately, right now, what comes after font feature settings is a magic 4-letter incantation. Luckily for you, the internet is full of resources for you to look at these magic 4-letter incantations. And if you want to do something, just go look it up on the internet, and then you can apply the relevant code. You can apply more than one at once with commas. They work in the modern browsers. Unfortunately, not IE9. I think that there might be some polyfills in progress, but I wouldn't trust it because it relies on rendering features deep inside the browser. So this might not be something that will ever be polyfillable. Okay, are your brains melting a little bit? Good, a little bit. Most of these are enhancements, right? Most of that doesn't work has to do with ancient dying versions of Internet Explorer. You can turn all of these features on today, and browsers that don't understand them will simply ignore them. People will not be worse off. So this is all stuff that degrades very, very gracefully. And you can, implement it and forget about it, and one day you'll wake up and all the old browsers are dead and it works for everyone, and you don't need to lift a finger. And in the meantime, you can check out the progress of the support for all these features and can I use. If you don't use can I use, you should use can I use. So yeah, go make stuff, go make it better, go make it easier to read. It matters on many, many levels. And thank you.